The ocean is calm, too calm. Black water slides past the hull at flank speed, the bow cutting a narrow scar through the night. No moon, no horizon, only darkness pressed against steel. Below decks, the deck plates tremble as turbines scream, pushing the ship harder than she was meant to run in peacetime. The air smells of hot oil and ozone, thick and metallic. Sweat runs down spines. No one wipes it away. On the bridge, red lights glow like dying embers. A radar scope pulses softly. Green light sweeping, sweeping again. Then it appears. A faint return. Then another. Contacts. Multiple. Closing fast. A voice breaks the silence, clipped, controlled, almost calm. Range decreasing. Out there, beyond sight, enemy ships are doing the same math. Distance, speed, time to impact. Hands tighten around railings, fingers rest on firing keys. Guns elevate, not toward what can be seen, but toward what must be there. The ocean does not warn you before it turns violent, and neither does the night. USS Fletcher was never meant to be remembered. She was not designed to awe crowds or dominate headlines. No towering superstructure, no armor thick enough to shrug off battleship fire. No flight deck, no fanfare. She was built for one thing: to fight, and to survive just long enough to fight again. Laid down when the war was already burning, Fletcher-class destroyers were answers to hard questions written in blood. Earlier ships had been too light, too short-ranged, too fragile for the vast, merciless distances of the Pacific, so the designers gave her speed, they gave her endurance, and they gave her teeth. 5-inch guns, dual purpose, capable of throwing steel at ships, aircraft, or anything unlucky enough to cross their sights. 10 torpedo tubes, heavy fish meant to kill ships far larger than herself. Depth charges stacked at the stern, waiting for shadows beneath the waves, all wrapped in steel, just thick enough to keep her alive, if her crew did everything right. She stretched longer than the destroyers that came before her, her hull riding the waves with a steadiness earned through brutal trial and error. At full power, she could outrun death itself, at least for a while. But steel does not fight wars. Men do. Inside Fletcher's narrow passageways, everything was designed for efficiency, not comfort. Pipes sweated constantly, dripping warm condensation onto steel decks, already slick with oil. Ventilation fought a losing battle against heat trapped below the waterline. The smell was always the same: diesel fuel, grease, salt, human bodies packed too close together. There was no silence aboard a destroyer. Even at rest, the ship breathed. Fans whined, pumps thudded, metal creaked as the hull flexed against the sea, and every man aboard learned to tell the difference between normal sounds and the ones that meant trouble. When Fletcher left the yard, she carried no myths, no legacy, only fresh paint and untested systems. Her crew were not veterans carved from legend. Most were young, some barely old enough to shave. What they shared was training drilled until it became instinct, gunnery until shoulders ached, damage control until hands moved automatically in smoke and darkness. Night drills where orders were shouted into blackness, trusting unseen men to execute without hesitation. Because destroyers did not get second chances, they screened carriers, they charged into torpedo fire, they hunted submarines alone in empty seas. They were sent ahead, sent first, sent where the risk was highest. And if they were lucky, they were forgotten by history. USS Fletcher steamed into the Pacific not as a hero, but as a tool, a sharp one, a necessary one. The ocean did not care what she was built for. Soon, it would test every bolt, every weld, and every man aboard her. Below the waterline, the war sounded different. It was louder, closer, never-ending. The engine room was a cathedral of noise. Turbines howled at a constant pitch that burrowed into the skull and stayed there long after a watch ended. Steam lines rattled. Gauges vibrated so hard their needles blurred. The deck plates were warm underfoot, radiating heat that soaked through boots and into bone. Air moved, but it did not cool. It only carried the smell. Hot oil, metal, sweat, and something sharp and electrical that burned the back of the throat. Men learned to breathe shallow without thinking about it. Most of the crew lived their lives in spaces never meant for humans. Narrow berthing compartments stacked with bunks, barely wide enough to roll over. No privacy, no darkness. Red lights glowed at all hours, turning faces into tired silhouettes. Sleep came in fragments, a few hours here, a few minutes there. Always with one ear open, trained to recognize the sound of general quarters even through exhaustion. When the alarm rang, men were already moving before their minds caught up. There was no room for panic on a destroyer. Every man had a station. Every station mattered. A loader on a 5-inch gun felt the recoil through his spine as each round slammed home. Brass casings clanged across the deck, hot enough to burn skin through gloves. Powder smoke hung in the air, bitter and thick, mixing with the salt spray that blew down from above. Below decks, damage control parties drilled endlessly. They carried shoring timbers, hoses, and patches through passageways barely wider than their shoulders. In training, they moved through simulated smoke. In combat, it would be real, choking, blinding, and unforgiving. They were taught one rule above all others. The ship comes first. If a compartment flooded, you sealed it. If a fire spread, you cut it off. If someone was trapped behind a watertight door, you did not open it unless ordered. These were not easy lessons. They were not spoken about often, but everyone understood them. Most of the crew were young. Farm boys, factory hands, students who had traded classrooms for steel decks and textbooks for technical manuals smeared with grease. They wrote letters when they could. Short ones, careful ones, no details. Just reassurances that everything was fine, even when it wasn't. Meals were hurried affairs, metal trays, lukewarm food, coffee strong enough to keep eyes open through double watches. Conversations stayed light on the surface. Jokes, complaints, stories from home. No one talked about fear. But it was there. It lived in the pauses between orders, in the way men checked their gear one more time than necessary. In the silence that followed rumors of ships lost somewhere over the horizon. A destroyer crew did not have the luxury of detachment. There were no vast compartments separating them from danger. When the ship took a hit, everyone felt it. The shock traveled through the hull, through the deck, through teeth and ribs. They learned to trust each other without question. The man sealing a hatch, the hand passing ammunition, the voice on the sound-powered phone relaying orders through chaos. Brotherhood on a destroyer was not romantic, it was practical. Survival depended on it. Above them, the Pacific rolled on, indifferent. Below decks, USS Fletcher carried men who did not think of themselves as heroes, only as sailors doing their jobs, one watch at a time. Soon the night would call them to their stations again, and there would be no room for hesitation. Night was where destroyers earned their keep. Daylight belonged to aircraft and big guns. At night, everything shrank. Distances collapsed. Mistakes became fatal in seconds. And the ocean turned into a black, featureless void where ships hunted each other by instinct and instruments. USS Fletcher moved without lights, her silhouette swallowed by darkness. Only the faint glow from shielded bridge lamps hinted at life aboard her. The sea was calm, but the calm felt wrong, like held breath. Radar had changed everything. Down in the Combat Information Center, men leaned over glowing scopes, eyes fixed on sweeping lines of light. Each pulse reached out into the dark and came back with whispers of steel. Contacts appeared as small, uncertain marks. Fleeting, unforgiving, range, bearing, speed. Numbers were spoken quietly, passed up the chain with care. There was no room for excitement. A false contact could draw fire. A missed one could doom the ship. On the bridge, orders came short and precise. Course changes by degrees, not guesses. Speed adjustments measured in knots that could mean life or death. Fletcher slid through the water like a blade, her screws churning silently beneath the surface. Below decks, general quarters had been set for hours. Men stood at their stations, muscles tight, sweat cooling on skin. The smell of oil and metal mixed with salt air forced down through ventilation trunks. 5-inch guns tracked invisible targets, elevating and traversing on command. Gun captains stared into darkness where nothing could be seen, trusting radar plots and shouted bearings. This was not how sailors had been taught to fight before the war. There were no signal flags, no clear formations, no sense of where the enemy truly was, only where he might be, right now. Out here, near the Solomon Islands, Japanese night tactics were feared. Their crews were experienced. Their torpedoes ran far and hit hard. One mistake could open a hull from stem to stern. Every man aboard Fletcher knew it. The ocean around the ship was empty until it wasn't. A new contact appeared on the scope, then another, then several more, tightening into a pattern that left no doubt. Enemy ships. The distance closed with terrifying speed. At these ranges, seconds mattered. The difference between firing first and firing second was often the difference between survival and silence. On the bridge, voices stayed calm, almost cold. Plot updates came faster now. Bearings shifted, ranges collapsed. The invisible enemy was maneuvering, turning steel hulls in the dark just as Fletcher was. Somewhere out there, guns were already trained. The first flashes came without warning, brief white blossoms on the horizon, too far to hear, too close to ignore. Shells arced overhead, their passage marked only by instinct and fear. Fletcher answered with speed, engines pushing harder as the ship heeled into a turn. Water rushed past the hull, loud enough to drown out everything but orders and alarms. This was the Iron Night. No flags, no speeches, no clear picture of the battle. Only men, machines, and moments measured in heartbeats. And the understanding that when the shooting started in earnest, there would be no way back. The night exploded without warning. A blinding flash tore across the darkness, followed by the deep, concussive crack of naval gunfire. The sound did not arrive all at once. It rolled across the water in waves, hammering the hull, vibrating through steel and bone. Fletcher heeled sharply as the helm went over. The deck tilted beneath boots slick with spray. Somewhere forward, a 5-inch gun fired, its muzzle flash briefly illuminating men frozen in stark white light. Teeth clenched, eyes wide, hands moving on instinct. Shells screamed overhead. You did not see them. You felt them. Each passing round tore the air apart, a tearing sound that set nerves on edge. Splashes erupted off the starboard bow as near misses threw columns of black water skyward, soaking the deck in cold spray that cut through sweat like knives. The bridge was alive with motion. Orders snapped out, precise and relentless. Course changes, speed adjustments, target bearings updated again and again as radar struggled to keep up with ships twisting through the dark at full throttle. Out there, enemy destroyers and cruisers were doing the same thing, turning hard, firing blind, launching torpedoes that left no trail, no warning, only death moving just beneath the surface. Someone shouted a warning, "Torpedoes!" bearing unknown. Fletcher surged forward, engines pushed to their limit. The vibration grew harsher now, a deep, angry shudder that traveled through the hull. Every man aboard knew the sound. The ship was being driven hard, maybe too hard. The first salvo landed close. A violent jolt slammed through the deck as water erupted alongside the hull. The lights flickered. Somewhere below, metal screamed as frames flexed against the shock. Men grabbed for handholds, steadied themselves, went back to work. Damage reports began to flow in. Rapid, controlled, no panic. Minor flooding, no fires, still fighting. Another gun roared, then another. Brass clanged across the deck, rolling into corners, glowing dull orange before cooling in the night air. Powder smoke mixed with salt spray, coating throats with a bitter taste that lingered long after each breath. The darkness made everything worse. There was no sense of scale, no clear idea of who was winning or losing, only fragments. A silhouette briefly caught in gunfire, a flash on the horizon, the sharp turn of the helm to avoid a threat that might already be too close. Men waited for the impact that might come at any second. A torpedo strike did not announce itself. It arrived as a tearing, violent certainty. Everyone aboard knew that. Every second without one felt borrowed. Fletcher twisted through the chaos, her guns firing when solutions appeared, her crew working with a discipline forged by endless drills and the knowledge that hesitation would kill them all. Time lost meaning. Minutes stretched into eternities. Commands blurred together. Sweat ran cold now, chilled by seawater and fear. Hands shook, then steadied. Again and again, and then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the intensity began to fade. Contacts opened range. Flashes grew distant. The thunder of guns moved away into the blackness, leaving behind only echoes and the hiss of water against steel. The night was still burning somewhere beyond sight. USS Fletcher slowed, engines easing back as the crew waited for the next order, the next impact, the next scream of steel. It did not come, for now. Silence after battle was never truly silent. It crept in slowly, carried on the hiss of steam and the slap of water against the hull. Guns fell quiet one by one, their barrels still hot, metal ticking softly as it cooled. The smell of burned powder lingered, heavy and acrid, clinging to clothes and skin. General quarters remained set. No one relaxed. Not yet. Damage control parties moved through the ship with flashlights and clipboards, stepping over spent casings and pooled water. Their boots splashed softly as they checked compartments, knocked on bulkheads, listened for the wrong sounds. Flooding reports came in measured tones. Minor, contained, hull intact, propulsion still online, words that meant survival. Below decks, men worked in cramped spaces where light barely reached. They shored up weakened frames with timber and steel, tightening bolts with hands that still trembled from adrenaline. Seawater was pumped out slowly, stubbornly, as if the ocean itself resented being pushed back. Somewhere, a wounded man was being treated, quietly, efficiently. There was no room for drama. Corpsmen worked by dim light, the smell of antiseptic mixing with oil and smoke. Above, the night seemed unchanged. Stars still burned cold and distant. The horizon was empty again, giving no hint of the violence that had just torn through the darkness. The ocean rolled on, indifferent to who had survived and who had not. Men leaned against bulkheads, catching their breath for the first time in hours. Helmets came off. Gloves were peeled away, revealing raw, reddened skin. No one spoke much. They listened. Every creak of the hull, every change in engine pitch, every unexpected vibration. A destroyer that had taken damage could betray you without warning. A cracked seam, a loosened fitting. Something missed in the chaos. USS Fletcher bore the marks of the night. Scars in paint, bent railings, equipment battered but functional. She was not untouched, but she was alive. And that mattered more than anything else. Orders came to reform, to rejoin the screen, to be ready, always to be ready. There were no cheers, no celebration, just nods exchanged in low light. Men returned to their stations, to watches that suddenly felt heavier now that the shooting had stopped. Somewhere out there, other ships were not still afloat. That knowledge settled quietly among the crew. It did not need to be spoken. It was carried in the way eyes avoided certain directions, in the pause before someone reached for coffee, in the long stares into darkness beyond the rail. Survival carried its own weight. USS Fletcher turned back into the Black Pacific, engines steady, hull holding. She had done what was asked of her. She had stood. And as the night slowly loosened its grip, the war waited, patient, unrelenting, and far from finished. Destroyers do not remember victories. They remember nights. Nights measured not in hours, but in alerts, in radar sweeps, in the quiet tension before orders come down the voice pipe. They remember the weight of responsibility that never lifts, only shifts from watch to watch. USS Fletcher would sail on, through more patrols, more screens, more long hours cutting through empty water where nothing happened, until suddenly everything did. She would escort ships that carried thousands of lives and strike at targets she would never see clearly. Her name would rarely make headlines. No decisive blow would be credited to her alone. No single moment would define her place in history. And that was the point. Destroyers were never meant to stand apart. They were meant to be there when it mattered most. Between danger and those they protected, between darkness and the fragile order carved into it by discipline and steel. Fletcher-class ships bore the war quietly. They took hits meant for others. They chased shadows. They arrived first and left last. When things went wrong, they were already moving toward the sound of trouble. USS Fletcher remembered the men who walked her decks, the loader who worked a gun until his arms went numb, the helmsman who held a steady course through confusion and fear, the damage control parties who sealed off compartments knowing what that decision meant. She remembered the heat below decks and the cold spray above, the smell of oil that never quite faded. The way the hull shuddered under full power, driven beyond comfort because hesitation was worse. When the war ended, the ocean did not change. Steel still rusted. Waves still struck the bow with the same indifference they always had. But the men who stepped ashore carried something heavier than sea bags. They carried nights like Guadalcanal, moments where the world narrowed to bearings and ranges, where survival depended not on glory, but on doing your job when fear pressed hardest. USS Fletcher survived because she was built well, and because the men aboard her stood when duty called. That is what destroyers remember, not the enemy, not the explosions, but the quiet resolve that kept them moving forward, even when the night burned. The screen goes dark. The ocean remains.